Thank you for joining me on the Investing for Freedom podcast. Today, I've got a great show that we're going to bring you. I'm super excited about it. I've got a good friend. His name's David, and I'm just excited about his background and his story. But I got to tell you real quick, the way that I met him was through a mastermind with a good friend, Chris Harder. And this is why I just love masterminds and coaching and just the entrepreneurial community in general, because the connections that you make along the way are just huge. And David had actually came into Chris's mastermind, and Chris put on this panel of sharks. And so we did this kind of like Shark Tank thing, and we had to, pitch our business idea. And it was pretty cool. And watching not only all the participants kind of, do their Shark Tank thing, but also just watching the sharks, the way they think about business and, the questions that they asked, it gives you some real insight into the way that they think too. And, I haven't really gotten to know you very well, David, but I'm excited to, expand and deepen that relationship, because I know with your business background and also just your values in life and the way that you think about people and business, I know you're going to be one of those people that are not only going to be a great mentor to me in my life, not only a great mentor to my audience, but I think you're just a friend to everybody you meet. So I'm glad to have you on the show.
I appreciate that. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the kind words, for sure.
Yeah. And I'm excited to get into it. So the 4 questions, who's had the greatest impact on your life?
So I'll add a little color to that, because I think a lot of times a lot of people within business, that becomes some sort of a mentor or someone that they looked up to through that life cycle of business. And unfortunately, I didn't have that. And I had really, basically I just made mistakes and learned from them. I didn't have that person. So when I really kind of sit back and reflect on, who that person, it'd be my wife. And I think it's largely because she was with me through the whole journey from the very beginning. And I mean, when you talk about impact, she was always that cheerleader, but also the tough love when it was needed. And so that's significant and material to my progress, the ups and downs and everything else. So I would definitely say my wife was the person, and she's not historically a business person. So she had a different perspective, and it really helped me a lot. So I'd definitely say her.
I love that. And I have multiple comments and questions, but I'm going to circle back to them. If you could narrow it down to one thing that has had the greatest impact on your success, what would that be?
So I think largely the ability to take on initiatives, projects, tasks that you're not 100% sure on how you're going to get it done. And maybe I'm saying that because that's how I started my career. Many years ago, I was a server at a restaurant, and somehow I started talking to one of the people I was serving. And I don't know how it got brought up, but they asked if I knew this certain thing technology wise. I was like, oh yeah, absolutely. I had no clue. Yeah. But they were offering me an opportunity to basically get paid to do a project. I was like, well, yeah, I can absolutely do that. So you better believe after I got done with that, I, went to learn how to do that. And that really armed me in a lot of different ways moving forward. I think I would say the ability to, just jump in with both feet. And if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to figure it out. And sometimes you won't, but by and large, if you just have the right attitude about it, you're going to get the problem solved, and you're going to be successful with it.
There's this age old question that everybody, like entrepreneurs, are they naturally born? Are they grown? And as I'm sitting here listening to you, and it doesn't really matter what side of the fence I'm on or you're on when it comes to that, but sure. I think entrepreneurs are inherently more prone to take that approach that you're talking about. But the reality too, and I think about this, I'm a Libra, which, I'm always kind of like balancing everything, and I'm kind of intuitive and emotional too. And I'm always like kind of reading, and I feel somewhat sorry for people in this day and age, because the schooling system and the way we're taught, and, you're not supposed to get things wrong, and you get graded on, getting things 90+%, right? And we can't make mistakes. And that's, I think, a detriment to, number one, humans in general. But I think it's the entrepreneurs. And again, whether entrepreneurs are born or not, I don't really know the answer to that. But I think it's the people that don't really buy into that whole thing of like, to me, Failing Forward, John Maxwell's book, is one of the greatest books ever, because that's how we learn. And when we're not scared to fail, and we're not scared to get in there and learn. When I hear you say that, like, you're not scared to take on tasks, you don't know how you're going to get it done. You don't necessarily have the skill set, but it reminds me of a quote, and I'll throw this back to you. I'm curious of your opinion on this. I think it was Colin Powell that said something like, you got to have at least 40% of the information, but most leaders, they act with 60 to 70% of the information, where a lot of people, they're trying to gather 90, 100% of the information to say yes to that thing that you were saying. They would need that 90% information or 90% know how to do it, where guys like you are like, man, I've got 50% of the know-how. I'm just going to get in there and figure it out.
Well, I think if you have the right leadership qualities, you're able to fill the delta with the people that you're working with. And that's really the point, right? Leadership, regardless of what the initiative is really about guiding the people in the process. Whether you know the nuts and bolts of it is immaterial, because that's what they're there for as part of that team, right? Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. I mean, and there's been a lot of examples of that in my career where I've had, very nominal amount of information, but by providing the leadership to bring it together, you're able to solve the problem for sure. Yeah. And I think another piece, not to bounce back, but when I think about the greatest impact is also, I was unrelentless when I was like building by myself, when I was in an apartment when my wife and I were not even married yet. I was even back in school, I would do school and then I would work and actually do the real learning, in my opinion, after school, right? So there's an element of having that work ethic that I think that you have to have. So yes, the ability to take something on that you're not completely sure about, but if you can't back it up with and solve that problem through intense focus and work, then you're never going to get there. So I think that, not to bounce back, but that kind of jives together, I think.
Yeah. And just for, there's no house rules here. I think bouncing back sometimes is where the gold is. So I'm happy to do it. And, you said something that reminded me in 2000, I was pretty young then still. I mean, I was probably 19. I went to a Franklin Covey symposium, and Norman Schwarzkopf was speaking there, which Norman was actually a mentor of Colin Powell's. And when you said that, it reminded me, he was talking about Norman's rules, and I think it was rule number 13. And what it was, and I'll give the condensed version, but basically you surround yourself with a team that's good enough that even when you go forward and you make bad decisions, that team rallies around you and they take that bad decision and they turn that decision around for the good. And that's stuck with me forever. And that's basically, after I said the Colin Powell thing, you kind of said the same thing. It's just surrounding yourself with the right leaders, the right knowledge, the right information, and realizing we're not going to get it 100% of the time, but we've built the team in a right methodology, the right people, that we go and we succeed through that.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's great. I actually haven't heard that name Norman in a long time. So that brings me back to being younger for sure. Right. Norman Schwarzkopf. Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah, 100%.
Makes a lot of sense. What was your greatest setback and what did you learn from it?
To be frank, I think that I wasn't traditionally trained through finances. So as I began my career, I really started with a blank canvas of knowledge, right? I wasn't brought up to really understand credit management or wealth management or leverage or any of those things that we all kind of know and appreciate now. So I had to learn it on my own. And so what happened was the greatest setback that had the greatest lesson, and I'm sure this echoes for a lot of people, 2008, 2010, that window was dismal at best for me. My business got cut in like 50% in about a 30-day period, and I wasn't prepared for it. I mean, money was coming in, money was going out, money was coming in, money was going out. And it was going out to leveraged depreciating assets in some cases, or, whatever it may be. So dealing with the turmoil of that set the stage for how I needed to fill the knowledge gaps moving forward. So I'm glad it didn't happen when I was, 60 years old and I'm, on my last, chapter, if you will, of wealth creation. It happened early enough to where I was able to level set. So I think it was the greatest lesson for sure, but it certainly had a significant negative impact at the time. but I wouldn't change it for the world. I mean, I don't want to do it over, but I wouldn't change it.
Yeah. What were a couple of the key takeaways that you learned through that process?
I think the main, well, I mean, in simple terms, don't spend before you have. I mean, that was part of it. And truthfully, it comes down to very basic money management, and that's how green I was to it. So I would love to have some like little tip or trick that I had explored or hadn't explored and therefore learned at that time. But it was really just basic stuff. It was understanding how to manage debt, understanding how to manage, I was a hustler. So I was always earning, which is why I was able to come out of it. But, I didn't have, understanding finance. Yeah. Personal finance is number one before you really start looking at business finance, because if you can't get your own personal situation shored up, you're not going to be able to extrapolate that to make mindful business decisions. And as an entrepreneur, let's be honest, you're going to have to leverage your own credit in some cases, or PG, or personal guarantee in certain places. And you need to make sure that you have a good starting ground. So I think, I don't know if that answers that question, but that's, yeah.
I love what you said there. And so I've said this so many times. I think one of my superpowers, if you will, is making complex things simple, and it's not even actually making complex things simple. It's just eliminating complexity. I think that's a better way to say it. And I'll be sitting with my team sometimes, and, we're like on a 25-minute roundabout, and I'm just watching and listening. And I'm like, finally, I'll be like, guys, what are we talking about? Because the real problem is this simple little thing right in front of us. Like you said, understanding personal finance. And I think a lot of times, we tend to overcomplicate it. So I love that you bring it back to just the simplicity of it. And I realized you were kind of hesitant this isn't how you said it, but you're like, guys, it's really simple. But sometimes we're looking for this like real complex, like, 7-step answer to how I, beat the recession in 2008. And the reality is I love what you actually said, because at the end of the day, it reminds me of something one of my first bosses said. I worked for a plumbing and heating company, and I'll never forget him saying one time, if this guy kept borrowing money, and I heard him say to the guy, he's like, listen, if I can't trust you to manage your personal life and expenses, how can I trust you to manage a $2 million project for me? And when I was kind of, I shouldn't have been hearing that, but I heard it, and it just stuck with me forever. And I love, again, sometimes we're looking for this complex answer, but the reality is it's just, everything comes back to being able to be financeable as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. And I think that's an art form, by the way. If you're able to take complex and break it down, that's not inherently in a lot of people's, MO. So I think that's a great tribute to your ability to do that. But I think most things are simple when you trim the fat. And that's in personal and business. We just like to add a lot of color to it because it makes it justify our feelings of chaos, right?
Yep.
But at its core, it's very basic. And there's a difference between easy and simple, right? A lot of them are simple. It doesn't mean there's easy, but it is simple in its nature, right?
Yeah. And I don't know if you've experienced this. We'll get into your background and everything else, but I've sat at a lot of tables with, some very smart CFOs, financial planners, private equity guys. And this there's been times, David, where I've felt like stupid because I didn't understand the words they were using, the vernacular, if you will. And what I've come to realize is I think some of that, and I'm not picking on private equity guys or anything, but I just think, the higher up that we go in the financial planning world, and, we need these words and these complexities. And I'm not saying that finance isn't complex, because it is. And that's why, guys like me have to hire CFOs and everything else. But the reality at the end of the day is I think sometimes that vernacular and the complexity is what makes us feel important, when in reality, I just have to cut through the weeds, because honestly, I'm not really that smart. I'm just like a normal everyday guy. And so I think that's what's kind of made me hone that skill set, is like, okay, what are we really talking about here? Really, it's usually pretty simple.
Well, 100%. I mean, how many conversations have we been in where those big words are thrown around? But really, in most cases, you put people in a group setting, you're going to have insecurities that are unveiled in different ways. And I think when you have those complex conversations, the truly confident person that has the ability to effectively communicate can communicate to an elementary school student on a complex idea, right?
Yeah.
So I've been there too. I've been in, M&A conversations, and there's times where I'm like, I have no clue what you just said. So I'm Googling it as they're talking, and I get it. Yeah.
And you're like, so is that good for me or is that bad for me if we get this deal done? I don't.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
You said something about simple versus easy. And I was sitting across from Robert Kiyosaki at a dinner one time, and I was telling him that we had been playing cash flow with our kids since they were little, and our kids would beat us in the cash flow game. And he was, oh, that's so cool, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, really at the end of the day, it's super simple. And man, he kind of laid into me, and he's like, it's not simple. And what I was meaning, and its use of words, it's simple in concept. If you just bring it down to like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, it's simple in concept, but it's not easy in implementation and execution in our life. Right. And you said it, simple and easy are two different things, really.
100%. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. I need to get that game. I keep forgetting about it.
I'll send you one. We bought a whole bunch of them at discount in the GoBundance group. So I'll send you one. I'm getting,
yeah. Thank you. I'd love to play with my kids. That'd be great.
Oh, it's so fun. Not to get off on a tangent, we'll edit this out, but there's an app with that too. So make sure you get the app.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. What is the piece of advice, the single piece of advice that you find yourself sharing the most?
I think it's probably changed over the years. And so it's probably I feel like where I've landed with that now is through years of different experience. And what I think that is, especially if I'm talking to, I have my son's 21, right? So he's on his last year's college. He's going to be going into, creating his future life. And so I can bring myself back to conversations with him. And, a lot of people talk about, especially when you're talking to young people that are going to go venture into what their career is going to be in their life and so on and so forth. A lot of people talk about the passion, right? Like do what you're passionate about. And, if you do something you're passionate about, the money will come. That is not true. 100%. Now, let me clarify. There are people that has been their life and it has ring true. And I think that that's fantastic. I don't think it's a mantra to communicate to people that if you just follow your passion, the money will come. Where I do think you can be more effective is follow your passion, but while you're doing that, being mindful about how you can maximize your opportunity with it. Mm-hmm. So you can still be passionate about what you're doing, but be smart about, well, if I do this, and I don't have a great example, but I really like making blankets. Okay. I like whittling, whatever you call it. Right. Mm-hmm. I like making blankets. Okay, well, that's a great passion. But so why don't we look at how can you do that? And instead of selling them to your neighbors, why don't we look at how we can explore like some sort of online exposure to, or potentially look at bringing other people on to make them to create scale and then go online and sell them. So the point being is if you're passionate, that's great, but still work with a mentor or whoever it may be to find a way to maximize the opportunity because, and I think I speak for most people, even if some people don't admit it, money makes things work. And it is okay to want to make a lot of money. It is something that you shouldn't be apologizing for because I'll tell you what, it creates a lifestyle that, you can appreciate in different ways. It gives you the opportunity to give in ways you may not have before. Mm-hmm. So follow a passion, but be prudent about the financial economics around what that passion looks like so that you're doing it kind of in parallel, mm-hmm. right? I think there's a lot of people that follow this passion not being mindful of economics of it. Mm-hmm. And then, they spend 5, 10, whatever years, like, well, it just didn't work. And it's like, well, it could have worked if you just had a little bit of more foresight or leadership from someone or mentorship, what have you, to do it in parallel. So that's kind of a long worded way of saying passion doesn't make money. Passion with literacy on business and finance does make money, mm-hmm. right?
Yep. And, I had mentioned when you answered question number 1, and I'll dive back into this because I'm interested to dissect it a little bit, but you said something that I think, and I'm glad you tied this back in because I was actually thinking about the passion piece. You said something about, your wife and being that cheerleader and the tough love and, when things got hard and this, what you said was, she wasn't necessarily, she didn't have a business background. And so she gave you a different perspective. But what I'm curious to dissect there, business gets tough. And when we come back to that passion piece, and I love that you hit that, because, a great example is my son. He's a professional wake surfer, and that's his passion. And he's building a business around that. But there's days where just because wake surfing is his passion doesn't mean that he's not getting his ass handed to him. It doesn't mean that there's parts of his business that he doesn't love. And I think when we go into that, there's a couple farces that I think we've done a bad job of as mentors and coaches. And this is one of them. And I love that you hit it. It's passion. Another one is, passive income, because the reality is, like, I love real estate. I'm a real estate guy, but the reality is very little is passive. And so we get into these things where follow your passion or, find passive income. And there is legitimate passive income, but the reality is most of this are sales pitches. And when you touch on that passion piece, I think I agree with you. That's set up for failure, because you're going to have some shitty days. If you're following your passion, I don't, if it's cabinet making or blanket making or wake surfing or whatever it is, finance, doesn't matter. You're going to have some crappy days and crappy months and crappy years where you're like not passionate about, the actual thing itself. And you got to power through that.
100%. I think that one thing is interesting. So my passion now, well, even historically, it really isn't tied to, I think when people talk about passion, they talk about like the product or service, right? Mm-hmm. The last business I was in payments, right? I'm not passionate about payments, and I don't really know who is, because that's kind of weird, right? Yep. But I really liked the business model. I liked my business partners. I liked the staff. I liked my role of leadership. I liked the consolidation in the space. I liked the multiples on exit. So I was very passionate about all of these components. What we did was immaterial to me, right? It could have been, well, we handle medical records digitally, or, we do this or that. I didn't really care about that. Mm-hmm. So when you look at passion, it's important to decipher, well, what is it? Because it doesn't necessarily mean the product or service is something that you're like, oh, I go to bed, and I just dream about, Visa and MasterCard, like, you don't think about it like that. You look at all of the components, and sometimes on the peripheral, that are very important to, that full kind of comprehensive look at what makes you excited to wake up in the morning.
Yeah. You're taking me back to a conversation I had with a kid named Dylan Burns. He was actually at that dinner we were at last week. And, I hired him while he was still in college, and he was my content guy. And he asked me this question one time. He said, when you started your first company, the plumbing and heating company, were you just like super passionate about plumbing? And I was like, no, like who's passionate about plumbing? But what I told him, I was passionate about delivering a better level of customer service than the company that, there was nothing worse than showing up at a job site or showing up at a customer's house and they're frustrated because they've been canceled on twice, because, certain information wasn't relayed, because they didn't know how much money they're going to be charged, all these things. And so what I was passionate about was, number one, building a better customer service experience through a dispatch process, et cetera. But then number two, being better to my employees, because I felt like we were always treated bad. And, the girls in the office were always, I should be careful because I don't know who's listening to this podcast, but I just wanted, it had nothing to do with plumbing. That was the product, right? It had everything to do with, and we delivered that. We built an excellent customer service experience. We grew that company to over 100 employees, but it wasn't, I used to tell my technicians this, there's nothing different between the competitor's American Standard toilet and my American Standard toilet. The difference is the difference is the process, the difference is the delivery. It's how we take care of them. And that's what I'm so excited that you brought up the passion piece.
Yeah. I think there's a piece of, there's a humanity piece that you have clearly with, that customer service. What does that really mean? It means that I'm making people happy. I'm contributing to the world in some way. I'm helping, right? Mm-hmm. Yes, there's an exchange service for compensation, right? But I think that's a form of giving. And I think when it comes to a lot of different ways that create passion, I think good leaders and good entrepreneurs, there's always a component of contributing that ties to it in some way. Mm-hmm. And I don't think you can really be effective as a leader or as an entrepreneur without, even if it's, you got to peel a few layers back, but there's typically some sort of contribution that is important to other people that ties to it.
Yeah, no, I love it, man. Circling back to question number one, one of mine and Kara's passions is the couples mastermind and doing couple work because, we've said this so many times, but I don't think that there's more powerful partnership than when a husband and wife are aligned and they're pulling in the same direction. And it doesn't mean that it's perfect. There's challenges, but when you said that your wife had the greatest impact on you, and surprisingly enough, I've kind of narrowed this down to impact. And a lot of times it is the mentor. A lot of times it's mom or dad. I've surprisingly had multiple people say themselves, which I've had to dissect and really work through. But a lot of times it is the significant other, the spouse, or a business partner. And I'm curious, just because we do so much couple work, and I'd like to dissect this a little bit. Your wife she didn't have a background in the business, but you said she was like your main cheerleader. But then also, I love how you brought in the tough love component. And I'm curious because I have a lot of conversations with hard charging men. I mean, we talk about the GoBundance group a lot, and there's a lot of chatter there about, and just in general, not GoBundance, but the wives are not as involved. I wish my wife would get more involved. But then I also hear this other side of it where it's my wife doesn't want me to do this. My wife doesn't want me to do that. And so I'm curious how you navigate, you're a pretty, I've never worked with you, but I'm guessing that as humble and as awesome and as loving and caring as you are, I'm pretty sure that you're, probably a hard charging guy as well. And so I'm curious, how do you navigate that between the cheerleader and the tough love? Has it ever been a challenge?
By and large, we've had, so like I said, she's not historically in business, right? But she has a very different personality than I am, or than I have. And she has the ability to look at people in a different way. I am more of that aggressive, hard charging, person. And so she kind of reels me back into reality sometimes, because I am very passionate. And I tell her I love passionately and I hate passionately. And so I'm, on this wide spectrum, and she can sometimes help align me into something that's a little bit more conducive for my own sanity. Right. There's certainly times where I have fundamentally disagreed with, the approach that she would take per se, 'cause she didn't understand the nuts and bolts of it. But like we said a few minutes ago, when you just look at it in its simple terms, you don't necessarily need to know all the details to have an effective, discussion about something, which is super weird that we're just bringing this full circle down to the 60 or 70%. But, I don't think it's been very challenging. I mean, there's times where I probably was like, yeah, she doesn't know what she's talking about. But there are times where I probably said, you don't know what you're talking about. But then I reflect on it, later on that day, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of a good point. So I have made material decisions oftentimes based on her input, because I would have maybe been more reactive, or I would have maybe been more of like a bull in a china shop. And I think that she has probably taught me what I think is one of the greatest gifts for someone who is hard charging and direct, and that is diplomacy. Diplomacy has bought me more goodwill in business than most attributes. And I find that I've been pretty effective with it, and I leverage it quite a bit because I think it helps build those relationships and even deal with contentious relationships.
Yeah.
So,
are you familiar with Naval Ravikant?
I don't believe so.
So he's a guy that a good buddy of mine recommended his book, and it's called The Almanac of Naval Ravikant. And this guy, I'm pretty sure he's in the tech space, but he's also a VC, an angel investor. And I think he's done really well. And he's a pretty smart guy when it comes to, just business and talent in general. But when I was reading his book, he made this comment in the book, and it's a 200-page book. He said, the most important decision you'll ever make in business is the person you marry. And I was like,
unequivocally.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm curious.
Well, think about it this way. I don't think people think about this as much as they should. And where I find that it stifles people that want to expand, right? So I've had friends that maybe had a very safe, W-2 pension type gig, right? and they want to grow, they want to expand, they want to trim their retirement 5 years earlier, whatever it may be. And I've enjoyed talking through that and mentoring some of that process of how that could happen. But who's over here has a louder voice than, Dave talking to someone, right? Yep. And I find that who you marry is probably one of the most impactful indicators of where someone's going to go. Because you're either going to cage an animal so long and then they're going to start biting, or you're going to let them out and you're going to be able to flourish together. And I think about when things are good, it's not a challenge, right? So there's been times in my relationship where, of course, she's not going to be mad that I'm an entrepreneur. Like, she's just loving every second of it. But she also earned that through trials and tribulations that I experienced in there for her, wherein, back again, in the last recession, there was some really challenging times. And she had mentioned one time, and I remember where I was sitting. She's like, have you considered getting a job? And I'm sure I was pretty emotional at the time because, the bank account was low and, things weren't working out. And I said, no. I may have said yes, but I was like, I don't think that's the right decision. I have to keep pushing along. Well, she's part of that journey, right? So I may have all this courage and say, I'm going to go do this and I'm going to find a way. Well, she's either a participant in success or a victim of the loss. So she has to carry that as well. So the person, and she supported that, right? So if she wasn't, imagine the friction you'd have, and that would eventually end in a problem down the road. So I think it's super important to find someone that, I think that's huge. And I'm thinking about it more emotionally right now. Not sad. I'm just like spirited in the sense that, like, yeah, that's huge.
And that's why I think I love the couples mastermind work, because a lot of times it's not, we were talking about simple, there's like this thread, but even so marriage is actually quite simple. It's not easy. But it's quite simple. And, the one thing, if there was one thing that Kara and I probably come back to and teach more often than not, it's like, how often are you guys going on a date? Like, how often do you connect just, you and her? And what I love about what you just said is, even in those tough times, like, you guys were communicating. And the reason why we love date nights is because it puts you on a consistent routine and pattern of learning to communicate. And even sometimes, when Kara and I are together, I don't have as much to say, and that's okay. And sometimes I have a ton to say, and that's okay too. But I think most people don't communicate. And whether it's in the workplace, whether it's entrepreneurs with their employees, or, fathers and sons, or worst case scenario, like husbands and wives. And I think, that's the single piece of advice that we find ourselves sharing the most in the couples mastermind is, like, make sure that you're going on. It doesn't have to be date night. Maybe it's date breakfast or date coffee or whatever, but because it creates that consistent check-in and communication. And in those hard times, if you can't communicate in good times, how the hell are we going to communicate in hard times? Like, that's crazy.
100%. And I think it's interesting. I have quite a few, some of my close friends, their spouse knows very little about their day-to-day business at all. And I think it's even such that my wife, when we had the last business, I think there's probably times where she's like, God, can you stop telling me so much? Right. But I like to talk to her. I feel good when I communicate to her. I feel good when I get feedback from her. And I think you're 100% right. Even if it's just a quick bike ride, just to connect and talk about it. I think it's mission critical for sure.
Yeah. I remember same period of time. It seems like everybody in our generation of business owners has a 07, 08 through 10 war story, but I had a gold mine. That went bankrupt on us in late 07, and they owed us $420,000 or something, which was a ton of money for my company at that point in time. And things were starting to slow down. You could see the cracks forming. It was a rough time. And that happening at that period of time was challenging. And, I remember, without getting in the weeds, first off, that's challenging enough. But then secondly, we had just gone on a growth spurt the last 2 years, and I was again up over 100 employees. And, we ended up laying off like 30 employees between like October and December of 2007. And, I think a lot of people don't think about this because they just see the evil entrepreneurs and capitalists. And we spend a lot of money and time and energy and passion, developing our workforce and finding them and getting to know them. It's a small family business. And when you have to make decisions like that, it leaves scars on you. And that was a rough time for me, not only, not getting paid. We eventually got paid, but it was a challenge, but also having to, change your entire company and you're working twice as much because you're, filling positions. And I'll never forget, this was the point of all this. I'm back to working probably 80, 90 hours a week. And Kara was always cool about that. My kids were always cool. I think communication is a key. Hey kids, I'm in this really busy time. I need some grace. But I'll never forget one day Kara said to me, she's like, I think you really need to like check in because you're stressed out. I'm worried about you. You're not the same person. The way you're treating the kids isn't the same. So it's not so much the fact that we're grinding and having to work. You have seasons, like you said in question number one. Sometimes it's not that easy, but she gave me that check, and she's telling me this, and I'll never forget, David. I said, what do you want me to do? Like I could lose everything. We could lose the business. We could lose our house. And she looked at me and she said, what are they going to do? They're going to take our kids? Are they going to take me away from you? I was just like, what do you say to that? Cause it's true.
Yeah, it is 100% true. It's hard to remember that though, when you're in the thick of it, and she's 100% right. And I think that that's sometimes a very grounding feeling that kind of gives you some calm of the chaos when you have someone who has the ability to say that to you.
Yeah. And when I see guys like you that have built successful businesses, you've had an exit, you're probably not done facing business challenges because, the next monster, the next devil, the next mountain's bigger than the last one. But I love what you said at the beginning there, your wife, the most important person, she's your cheerleader, but also that tough love and the check-in. And really that was like like you said, that was such a down to earth moment for me because really at the end of the day, if a guy like you lost everything tomorrow, you'd figure out how to get it all back again because they can't take your knowledge. They can't take your information. They can't take your connections and they can't take your most important relationships, your wife and your kids.
100%. I think that that's something that there's been some dismal times, and not just in that period, right? We've all had this, ebb and flow. Whether you're dealing with a dismal time of the moment or a dismal time you're borrowing from the future, which we do a lot, right? If you bring it down to the simple terms of what your family values are, or your value as a man, it can oftentimes just take things down a notch because it doesn't feel so heavy. Because at the end of the day, if I've got my kids and my wife and, then your core is good. But this sounds crazy, but I oftentimes, when I get into these cycles of historically, of those dismal moments, I would think about what would happen right now if I just got a call from a doctor that my youngest son had a brain tumor, right? Or my wife was just diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, something. I try to build it up in my head to be very scary and painful. And it immediately calms me. It immediately fills me with gratitude. It changes the value I'm placing on this challenge. And it completely just shifts your perspective. Now, I know I'm doing it through the modality of a dismal future, right? But it works for me. And I've used it quite a few times. And, I think it helps me feel grateful for what I have.
Well, it's so easy to get tied up into little things that just don't even matter. And that brings you back to center.
100%. 100%.
Well, let's, unless you have anything more, I think that was a great thread and great conversation. Let's shift to, I'd love to just learn a little bit more about your background and what you're working on now. And how'd you become a shark?
So it's actually funny. So as it relates to I'll come back to the Chris Harder connection. That was really an interesting story. But I started in the branding and marketing space in 2000, before the e-com, 1999-ish, if you will. I had an e-commerce business at the dawn of that. I had the wrong partner, which many of us have already done. I dabbled in a few things. I was young and dumb and just trying to learn business by doing it, right? Instead of being traditionally trained, I thought I would just jump in. And which is funny, if I look back in time, I realized, man, you had no idea what you were doing, like on any level, right? But I got into the branding and marketing space, and I started an agency, and I kept it pretty small at the beginning because I didn't know what I was doing. And then also because I liked the flexibility that I had. And I had always had a dream of moving to the beach, to live on the beach because I like surfing, and I grew up in Arizona. So 2015, we moved to California so we could live on the beach. And it was just this amazing experience to fulfill this dream since I've, been a kid. Well, I liked it there. And my wife and kids wanted to move back because their friends and family were here in Arizona. So we did move back, and it's the best thing that ever happened, because when we moved back, I had met with a colleague and friend of mine from college, who actually at one point in time was a client on the branding and marketing side, and they had the payments company. And they, we had a meeting where within an hour and a half of them saying, hey, we have some branding and marketing needs. Long story short, we decided that I'm going to come on as the CMO, and I'm going to be a partner.
Nice. And
I was, the whole time we were in California, my plan was I need to build this agency into an exitable business within 10 years. And that's a long time in my mind now, but agencies are much harder to scale type of business, right?
Yeah.
So I had to give runway, and that was my focus. I was super excited. I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. Binders of notes and this and that. And then it got unwound in an hour and a half. And I'm like, well, I guess I'm getting into the payments business. So I did that. I transitioned over, and it was very obvious quickly that the CMO role wasn't right for me. I ended up, the board voted me in as the COO. So I was the chief operating officer for the duration. And the reason why I did it was really because I know this space is highly scalable. There's a lot of consolidation, and just to be frank, I wanted an exit, and this was an opportunity to do it faster than an agency. Right. So I did that, and it was a 4.5 year period. I was largely at the helm of many of the pieces of the business to grow it. I started diligence for the exit 8 months before we did. So it was about 4.5 years, and we 10x the value from the time I got there until the time we left or, exited. And it was an incredible education. And it really taught me a lot about, when I talk about the passion, where some passions I didn't even know I had developed, right? In terms of the leadership piece and so on and so forth. It also showed me that the branding and marketing piece wasn't really where my heart is, right? It was providing for my family, and I like it. And ironically, I'm really like numbers and finance. And I also was in branding and marketing for 20 years. So I don't know what brain I'm using, but something is in there. And so anyways, we went through the exit, and they didn't want 3 of the owners through a transition. They ended up acquiring 2 of us. And so it was December 31st, 2020. We had a 10 p.m. close for Arizona time, so we could get 2020 tax treatment, and they wanted Canadian tax treatment for 2021. So it was 10 p.m. close for us, midnight for them.
Wow.
And yeah, it was really exciting, New Year's Eve for sure. And then, but it was weird because all of a sudden it was like hustle. I'm in diligence. I was managing all the diligence for 8 months, and all of a sudden,
done.
Ink on paper, done. Yeah. And I remember the next week I just habit. You pull up your email, and I'm like, there's nothing there. There's no phone calls. There's no nothing. So that was obviously a really great experience. But then I started getting into some real estate stuff. I'm a big fan of the multifamily stuff. I've been doing some of that. I have some other real estate stuff, and I'm sure at some point you and I may end up talking that I want to get into. But I'm really focused. I'm doing some consulting right now. And I've worked with a local gal here on her startup for Smart Sense, which you're familiar with. I think that the fintech space I like it. I love the model. I'm obsessed with models more than service and product, because I look at it in terms of the seasons, right? I mean, how many seasons do I have before I want to, kind of, not do it anymore?
Yeah.
But what I did learn, and I've actually had this conversation last night with Aaron, I don't think I'll ever stop working, because this last year and a half has taught me that it is not fun to not wake up and have a specific business goal for me, like something I'm driving towards.
Yeah.
It's a very lackluster feeling, right? You can only vacation so much and have fun and play Oculus at 2:00 in the afternoon, right?
Yeah.
So having that purpose and vision for something greater is something that I don't think will ever stop. But this is a highly scalable business that we're raising capital for right now, and once you're able to secure that, I think it's going to be an amazing opportunity. But I really like having my fingers in a lot of different things.
Yeah.
I want to get into, I won't even go into everything right now, but I have a lot of different things I'd like to participate in. So being able to, along that journey, contribute to people like, your audience, and be able to, I really want to help people that are maybe in a different stage, or learn from people that are further advanced. But I like the process right now of being able to connect with people and help them where I can.
Yeah, I love it. So, and you said something that I really relate to. In 2014, and I'll tell this story real quickly and then ask you a question about it. In 2014, my wife and I sold our business, plumbing and heating company. And honestly, like, I wasn't even, the difference I think between probably you and I is, like, I didn't have exit on my brain when I started building this. And also, like, even getting into real estate, in my mind, I had a goal of buying 2 income producing properties a year for 10 years. And then I figured by the time I was 65, I'd still have this company and I'd have a retirement too. So that's kind of where my brain was at. But then, some things started happening, which I won't get into, my wife and, just her wanting to evolve and some thoughts. And it really set us on this trajectory where, I started thinking about maybe not necessarily selling the business, but maybe not being involved in it on a day-to-day basis. Anyway, universe lined up, God came along, and we had an exit in 2014. And I've often said the day that I closed was the best and worst day of my life, because I still get to this date, I still get a multiple 6-figure check from an exit. So it was great. It was a great day. But I'm 30, I was 34 or 33 years old, 34. And so, like, I have achieved the American dream, right? But I lost my purpose, man, because I was not ready for, who's Mike after this. And so I'm curious, I'll toss it back to you, but it sounded to me like you were maybe a little bit more mentally prepped than I was for an exit, but also still, it was like, I'm curious what it was like after that.
I don't think that I was mentally prepared at all, to be honest with you, because I didn't even know that I would experience some of the feelings that I did. The American dream talks about retirement as, you're going to go golfing and travel the world and this and that. But I'm not ready to retire, for one. Number two, I still have a day-to-day life. I have kids that have to go to school. I've got kids that got to go to football or cheer or whatever. I have like a busy family life. And when you have such a big piece of your mind space 24 hours a day that's absorbed in doing something and accomplishing something, when you remove that, you have this empty space and you don't know how to fill it, right? I have been feeling it in different ways, but it's a pretty big jug, right? I mean, you think about how much space you spent, on this business, and I wish I had been. I don't think you can prepare anyone for it, to be quite honest. I think it was something that I've never thought. It wasn't, it wasn't dismal at its core, but there was definitely days where I'm like, God, I'd put my head on my pillow. I'm like, what did I do today to contribute, to add value and, or show up for myself. Right. I'm like, well, okay, well, I went to the gym this morning and then I brushed my teeth and went to bed. Right. So I don't think you can be prepared for it, but I do think that just being aware of the fact that if you are in business and you are heading towards some great transition, just don't get too caught off guard, always. And I think just staying busy. Now, I know people say, well, busy's not good, productive, whatever you want to call it. The bottom line is keep your mind space producing, right? Yep. Fill it with something productive that is meaningful.
Yeah.
And meaningful doesn't mean passionate. Meaningful could mean I don't care about it. I just want to make a ton of money. When it comes to real estate, I don't care about it.
Yeah.
I just want to generate cash.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to hide it. That's just the bottom line.
Yeah.
I don't care about the apartment complex at all.
Right.
But I care about the model and so on and so forth. So it fills mind space, right? So I think just making sure you can fill that mind space and hopefully have some meaning in it as well, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's also why you team up with like a good property manager at the apartment complex, because they care, hopefully, right?
Right.
No, I love it, man. This has been a great conversation. I want to be cognizant of your time. Anything else that you want to share that's on your heart or on your mind?
Honestly, and I hadn't even thought about this until going on this, I think that if you have people within your area of influence or audience that are early in the process, right, of entrepreneurship in some capacity, I would be more than happy to help them in some way, right? I mean, I've done this in a few different areas, and I found that it's just my way of giving back in some way. No, it's not going to be us meeting 8 hours a day for the next 3 months or something, but I really like helping young people because our young entrepreneurs, but that doesn't mean that's not age, that's sure. Young to entrepreneurship, because I had no one help me. I had no mentor. I looked for them. I could never find them. And at the end of the day, that is a big thing for me, is if I can help give someone guidance and send them on their way, just feel free. And I'd be happy to help anyone of your audience or, colleagues or whatever. And if it's not fruitful, fine. But if it is, and I can add value, then I'd be more than happy to set up calls or whatever it may be to help people. So.
Wow. That's amazing, man. Very, very generous. How do people get in touch with you?
You can go to David Schoenecker. My last name is super fun to spell. DavidSchoenecker.com or David_Schoenecker on Instagram. That'd probably be the best.
Cool. Well, we'll put all that in the show notes, and then I'll tag you on Instagram and all the good
awesome.
stuff. So, man, I got to tell you, from the, there's just some people, and again, we haven't spent a lot of time together, but from the time that I briefly met you at Chris's thing and just a couple times we've been together, I love the way you show up in life. I love the way you make everybody around you just feel, important and great. And I don't think that that's something that you probably work on. I think it's just who you are. So I appreciate you.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that for sure. I appreciate having me on. I think it's a compliment. So thank you.
Well, look forward to many more, and thanks for being on the show. Cheers, brother.
Anytime. Thanks, Mike.